Power in the automotive world has never been a static idea. Every decade rewrites what strength, sound, and speed are supposed to mean. Some people want the pulse of acceleration to feel mechanical and raw, while others chase innovation through silence, software, and instant torque. The debate is not just about transportation, it is about culture, memory, and what we choose to pass on. When a familiar silhouette returns with a new heartbeat, it tests how much loyalty is tied to sound, shape, or philosophy. Engineers and fans do not always agree on what counts as authenticity, and the gap between nostalgia and progress can stretch wider than any test track. Regulatory pressure, shifting fuel strategies, and changing technology keep reshaping the road ahead, but identity does not switch as fast as a drivetrain. Some see the future as a clean slate, others see it as a negotiation with the past. The stakes rise when heritage carries expectations that cannot be silenced or ignored. If you are ready to dig into a machine that forces everyone to pick a side, hit like and subscribe, then drop a comment with the next model you want covered. The 2024 Dodge Charger Daytona SRT enters Segment 1 as a machine shaped by pressure, expectation, and legacy, and this is where the groundwork matters most. The Charger Daytona SRT is not arriving into a quiet landscape but into a market reshaped by emissions rules, infrastructure questions, and customer identity. To understand how the Charger Daytona SRT reached its current form, you have to start with the final chapters of the previous gasoline lineup, where the Charger name had been tied to supercharged V8 engines and a reputation built around acceleration and sound. The transition away from internal combustion was not an overnight move but a response to tightening regulations and the rising cost of keeping high-displacement engines compliant with evolving standards. The Charger Daytona SRT represents the company's attempt to maintain performance branding while shifting the engineering foundation to electric architecture. The development process involved evaluating how to package a battery platform without losing the proportions that defined earlier Chargers. Designers focused on preserving the wide body stance, long hood impression, and aggressive front profile, even though the underlying mechanics changed. Aerodynamics gained more attention than previous generations because minimizing drag had a direct effect on range and temperature control. Vents, channels, and underbody shaping were revised to manage airflow more efficiently, with engineers balancing functional gains against visual familiarity. Interiors for the Charger Daytona SRT followed a similar logic of continuity and modernization. Materials moved toward sustainable or lightweight composites, while displays and digital interfaces replaced many of the traditional analog clusters. At the same time, designers attempted to maintain a driver-focused cockpit rather than trend entirely toward minimalism, arguing that buyers of this model still look for a sense of engagement. Battery integration required rethinking chassis rigidity and weight distribution. The team used structural bracing and revised mounting points to ensure stability under high load and repeated stress scenarios. They also explored how to position the battery pack for both safety and performance handling, and those decisions shaped the seating position and cabin floor height. Range targets were chosen to align with typical long-distance driving expectations in the performance segment, while acknowledging that fast-charging networks remain uneven across regions. Engineers had to plan for both home charging and public station compatibility. Thermal management became a central engineering challenge because performance driving places heavy demand on battery temperature control. Cooling channels, heat exchangers, and software thresholds were refined repeatedly. Another component of development involved the artificial exhaust system meant to replicate a sense of auditory feedback. Some testers focused on frequency tuning to prevent the sound from feeling synthetic, while others debated how loud it should be compared to earlier gasoline models. In parallel, suspension geometry and tire selection were evaluated to handle the added weight of the battery without sacrificing cornering stability or launch traction. Braking systems used regenerative technology to recapture energy but also relied on mechanical components capable of repeated stops under heavy stress without fade. Each of these elements contributed to shaping how the Charger Daytona SRT positions itself within the broader discussion of what a muscle car can be in an electric era. Enthusiasts and engineers kept revisiting how tradition and innovation could coexist without one overwhelming the other. All of these early decisions lead to the next phase of analysis, where we look deeper into how the Charger Daytona SRT performs and how its features compare to familiar expectations. That is where Segment 2 picks up. Segment 2 begins with the 2024 Dodge Charger Daytona SRT stepping into performance evaluation. And this is where the numbers, sensations, and perceptions start to define whether the transition from combustion to electric power meets its promise. The Charger Daytona SRT has to validate itself beyond styling and branding. In motion, the Charger Daytona SRT delivers instant torque delivery that changes the traditional rhythm of acceleration. Instead of building revs, power arrives immediately, altering how drivers perceive launch and mid-range response. Engineers calibrated traction control and torque vectoring to manage wheel slip without negating the visceral feel that performance buyers expect. Stability software intervenes less aggressively in sport settings, giving seasoned drivers more room to work with the chassis. The artificial exhaust system plays a role in shaping cabin feedback. Sound levels increase with throttle input and vehicle speed, attempting to replicate the progressive character of earlier models, though some testers argue that the pitch and resonance still remind them of synthesized audio under certain conditions. Steering response was tuned to retain weight and precision, something that matters when competing expectations collide between traditional muscle drivers and newer electric performance buyers who prioritize control. Handling tests showed that the added weight of the battery pack requires firmer suspension tuning, and the Charger Daytona SRT uses adaptive dampers to adjust ride stiffness depending on mode selection. In controlled track sessions, the Charger Daytona SRT demonstrated strong corner exit traction and consistent regenerative braking transitions that avoid abrupt pedal feel. Testers noted that brake pedal mapping was refined to maintain predictability during repeated high-load use. Range under spirited driving conditions naturally decreases faster than under casual driving, but the battery management system attempts to preserve output by moderating thermal stress during prolonged acceleration. For drivers, the question becomes whether the real-world range aligns with their expectations for daily use and occasional performance sessions. Home charging setup and regional infrastructure influence ownership satisfaction more than track statistics alone. Inside the cabin, the Charger Daytona SRT uses digital instrumentation that can display torque output, battery temperature, and energy regeneration in real time. This data-driven approach replaces analog gauges that once tracked oil pressure and coolant temperature. Seating positions prioritize lateral support due to the vehicle's ability to generate sustained cornering force, and materials focus on durability and comfort without pushing into luxury territory. Infotainment integration includes performance telemetry readouts and customizable settings for throttle response and simulated sound intensity, giving drivers options to dial the experience closer to their personal preference. Critics of the Charger Daytona SRT argue that without the mechanical tension and vibration of an internal combustion engine, some of the physical engagement is muted. Supporters counter that the immediacy of electric propulsion offers a different kind of connection that does not rely on engine rumble. Dealers and market analysts note that initial allocation will likely test demand in regions where performance heritage runs deep. Pricing strategy aims to place the Charger Daytona SRT in a position that appeals to both longtime brand followers and new EV adopters. Insurance and maintenance projections differ from earlier models, thanks to fewer moving parts and electronic braking components, which may affect ownership cost comparisons over time. As more test units reach reviewers, feedback will shape public perception and could lead to updates through software revisions or accessory packages. Some enthusiasts have already begun speculating about aftermarket modifications, although the electric platform limits traditional engine tuning methods and shifts attention toward suspension, wheels, and software recalibration. When taken together, these performance elements show that the Charger Daytona SRT is not trying to mimic every trait of its predecessors but rather reinterpret them through a new template. Where it succeeds and where it stirs resistance both influence its reception in the market. The next section looks beyond capability to the larger impact on identity, community, and the long-term direction of this model, and that leads us into Segment 3. The 2024 Dodge Charger Daytona SRT within the larger cultural and strategic context. And this is where long-term consequences and identity shifts become clearer. The Charger Daytona SRT must function as more than a product. It must serve as a statement of direction. Enthusiast communities are not unanimous in their response, and reactions range from enthusiastic adoption to cautious skepticism. Car clubs that once celebrated exhaust tone and manual modifications are re-evaluating what community events and shared experiences will look like with electric setups. The Charger Daytona SRT intersects with that evolution because its presence forces discussions about what defines authenticity in performance. Some owners see the platform as an opportunity to explore new types of modifications such as wrap customization, aero tuning, and software-based performance settings. Others worry that the absence of mechanical sound and traditional engine maintenance may dilute the culture that formed around late-night garage work and long-distance cruises. Environmental perception also shapes the reception of the Charger Daytona SRT. Supporters cite reduced tailpipe emissions and the possibility of cleaner energy sources, while skeptics question the production footprint of battery manufacturing and disposal at the end of life cycle. Government incentives and infrastructure funding add another variable, as policy decisions could influence how quickly charging networks improve and whether owners feel confident in taking the Charger Daytona SRT across multiple states without logistical concerns. The economic impact extends to manufacturing workforce adjustments. Retraining and resource allocation affect suppliers and factory processes that previously focused on engines, transmissions, and exhaust systems. In dealerships, staff are learning how to communicate performance benefits without relying on displacement figures or horsepower ratings tied to combustion. Training includes explaining torque delivery, charge times, and software interfaces. Long-term brand identity rests on whether the Charger Daytona SRT can sustain buyer interest across multiple model years. Planned updates, special trims, or limited editions could help retain excitement. The possibility of future variants with different battery sizes or track-focused setups is already a topic within internal planning, although nothing is guaranteed until initial sales performance is measured. Market analysts monitor pre-orders and test drive feedback to forecast how the Charger Daytona SRT might influence residual values of earlier models. Some believe classic combustion versions will climb in desirability among collectors, while the electric version builds a separate following. Perception among younger buyers also matters, especially as many grew up during a shift away from gasoline performance and may see the Charger Daytona SRT as their first entry into muscle car heritage. Schools, tech programs, and media coverage will influence how upcoming generations interpret the meaning of performance. The Charger Daytona SRT plays a visible role in that narrative because of its branding history and visual continuity. International interest adds another layer. Even though production and marketing focus on the domestic market, global observers view the Charger Daytona SRT as a sign of how American performance identity is changing. The influence on aftermarket businesses could be significant because new categories of software tuning, battery performance upgrades, and suspension components may emerge to meet demand from owners looking to personalize the vehicle. Insurance companies watch claims data to assess risk factors associated with high-torque electric vehicles and advanced driver assist features, potentially adjusting premiums over time. Legacy building depends not only on engineering success but also on how the Charger Daytona SRT is remembered by its owners. Nostalgia tends to crystallize around experiences that feel personal, and that will depend on how easily drivers integrate the vehicle into their daily lives and road trips. Whether the Charger Daytona SRT becomes a symbol of progress or a divisive experiment will depend on how it navigates the interplay of culture, technology, and expectation over the next several years. As we approach the conclusion, the final section brings together the key takeaways and looks ahead to what the Charger Daytona SRT means for the broader future of performance identity, which leads directly into the closing summary. The 2024 Dodge Charger Daytona SRT closes this journey by showing how performance identity can bend without snapping. Its arrival proves that heritage does not vanish when technology changes, it adapts through intent and execution. The Charger Daytona SRT does not erase the memory of earlier versions but challenges buyers to consider what made those machines matter in the first place. Sound and combustion shaped a legacy, but speed, stance, and presence were also part of the formula. In this electric form, the Charger Daytona SRT still carries the silhouette and attitude that defined its nameplate, even if the power source comes from batteries instead of pistons. Drivers who step into this platform encounter a new rhythm of acceleration, simplified maintenance routines, and cabin technology that replaces old analog clusters with digital clarity. For some, these shifts feel like progress, while others see them as a departure from mechanical understanding. Range and charging infrastructure remain defining questions for anyone considering long-term ownership, but the Charger Daytona SRT attempts to build confidence through thermal management systems, regenerative braking, and compatibility with multiple charging solutions. Performance metrics speak to a future where instant torque and stability software reshape how drivers experience straight-line launches and sweeping curves. The Charger Daytona SRT uses these abilities to argue that muscle can be expressed through responsiveness instead of combustion. The cultural impact extends beyond engineering considerations. Car clubs, enthusiasts, and aftermarket builders must decide how to integrate electric performance into traditions once built on engine tuning and exhaust sound. The Charger Daytona SRT becomes a reference point in that conversation because its name carries weight, and any change to it echoes through automotive communities. Some owners will embrace customization through software recalibration, suspension adjustments, and visual modification rather than engine swaps or exhaust installations. Others may observe from the sidelines to see how the culture evolves. Economically, the Charger Daytona SRT influences manufacturing strategies, dealership training, and market positioning, proving that a single model can act as both a product and a turning point. Its success or difficulty will inform future decisions about trims, special editions, and performance variations, and the response from buyers will guide how aggressively the electric transition progresses. Younger drivers who encounter the Charger Daytona SRT as their first exposure to this brand's performance history may form a connection separate from combustion nostalgia, and that could shape how legacy is remembered decades from now. If the Charger Daytona SRT meets its goals, it may become the bridge that carries a familiar name into a different energy era without losing presence or purpose. If it struggles, the lessons learned will still influence development paths and consumer expectations across the segment. Either way, the Charger Daytona SRT marks a defining moment in how muscle identity is reinterpreted for modern demands, and that significance will outlast early reactions, turning this model into either a bold first step or a reference point for what comes next.